The session is Community Gardens, Keys to Success and Sustainability, and our presentation is from Mark Tanzig and Janice Piotrowski. Thank you. And they're going to talk a little bit about their background and get into their presentation. Thank you.
I retired about 3 years ago, and I needed something to do. And there was some county land out at Fort Braden, and we put our eye on it and decided that it would be nice to have a community garden out there. I belong to a little unofficial garden club at Fort Braden called the Green Thumbs that maintain the grounds around the community center. And it's really been more successful than we ever imagined. My background, I worked in a law office for 51 years, so I had really no experience in gardening. My husband did the gardening when we were married before he passed away. And my mother gardened. I think that's what drove me to gardening more than anything, and it's really good that we have a resurgence in gardening because the children of today will have that memory also and lead them to gardening. I'm a master gardener. And other than that, I really had no previous qualifications other than my administrative experience at the law office. Mark?
I'm Mark Tanzig, and I'm a biologist with Leon County. Trevor Hilton was to be giving this presentation, but he had a family emergency, so they asked me to step in for him. I'm a biologist with the county, and I'm involved with the DeMayan Garden Project. We help people start gardens, and I've been gardening since I was a little kid because of my mom.
These are some of the things that we're going to be talking about. There are actually several kinds of community gardens. There's gardens for people gardening for themselves, which is what we do at Fort Braden with individual plots. And then there are really gardens, team gardens, or gardens that are done for charitable purposes. They can be done by individuals, or they can be done by teams, businesses, schools, and then team gardens can also be done for educational purposes, which is really what Mark and DeMayan does. We'll talk a little bit. This is going to be pretty basic. Some of these things you may already know. We're going to talk about physical layout, the organizational structure, because gardens, like any organization, are more about people than they are about growing vegetables when you get right down to it. There's a lot of places you can learn how to grow vegetables, but working with people is a little more complicated, and it isn't always as easy to find out how to do that. And we'll talk a little bit about financing, gardening rules, community building, and problems and solutions, and we'll have plenty of time for you to answer questions. So the basic things you need when you start a community garden is to make sure that there are going to be people in the area who want and need to garden that will support it. And you need plenty of sun, at least 6 hours a day. Some shade isn't bad, and late in the afternoon in the summertime, and you definitely need water access. You can locate that on private property, in a subdivision, on acreage, near a business school, but two of the programs that are starting now, Tallahassee, City of Tallahassee already has in place a gardening program on city property where you can apply to have a garden there, and the county's program will be in place by the end of the year. They also supply instruction, help on it, and the county has a grant you can apply for up to $500 to help with your startup fees. Anything you'd like to add? Physical layout. You really need to consider what type of garden you're going to have. I know DeMayan do you have raised beds? And
we do raised beds mostly.
Right. Ours, Fort Braden, my experience, what I'm speaking from is my experience at Fort Braden, although I do participate in the demonstration garden at the extension office where we have a mixture of conventional gardening and raised beds and hydroponic and even a pallet garden. At Fort Braden, we have a combination. The gardeners can do just traditional gardening or raised beds. So you need to consider what you're going to have before you start. Where we started, we had a field, as you noticed in one of the previous slides. It had a lot of bahia grass in it. And getting rid of whatever's in your spot is going to be a problem sometimes. Usually it is. You may even have brush and so forth to clear. So you're going to have to deal with, the best way to deal with sod is to lay down cardboard and apply mulch on the top of that. And another possibility is solarizing, where you put plastic down, seal it around the edges, and leave it for 6 weeks or so, and it kills whatever's underneath it. The trouble with that is it also kills good things like bacteria and so forth. When you put in your water lines, make sure you bury them deep enough so that you don't run into them when you're tilling. You don't want to run them through garden beds, but if they sometimes do work out in the pathways. And provide a place to walk around. Now, raised beds, that's not a problem. You can walk around them, but when you have just plots, I've seen community gardens where you had to go all the way to the end of a road to go to the other side of the garden, or unless you wanted to walk through somebody else's garden. So put walking paths and wheelbarrow paths between the beds. Plot size, there's a lot of talk about gardening to feed a family of 4. Well, depends on how much vegetables they eat. You really just pick a plot size that fits where you are gardening. You may need fencing for security or to protect you from animals. We are next to a national forest, so we have a deer fence. It's nice to have shelter from rain and sun. We actually have a pole barn that was on the property, and we really use it a lot. It's good to have storage. The trouble with storage is that you accumulate things just like you do at home, so you have to keep policing it. And everybody has different levels of tolerance for what you store. Bathroom access is questionable. Some people feel it provides a security problem, people hiding in a portalette or so forth. And you definitely need seating or rest areas. It could be a hay bale.
I think, Janice, with a community garden, it's a lot easier to do it at your house by yourself, but a community garden, you're working with a lot of people, so a lot of these things, I think she said she has good experience with administration, is, getting your group together and trying to figure all this stuff out will help immensely further down the road.
It certainly will. This is some of the fencing that we have around our garden. We have our spigots. We have one spigot. Well, we have 2 spigots between each 2 plots. In other words, 2 gardeners will share that spigot, and the county actually had to put in access for our garden. You want access that's strong enough to support trucks. We had a truck come in the other day delivering mushroom compost. And when you have a gathering of gardeners, you want to have enough parking space for all of them. The top one is the garden at Second Harvest. That's one of the gardens that's done for charitable purposes. That's maintained by some of the master gardeners, and the produce there goes directly into Second Harvest. So every time we bring produce in, it goes right back out the door. The one at the bottom is the demonstration garden at the Agriculture Center, and the produce there also goes to Second Harvest or Haven of Rest. It's a really great place to go check out different methods. We have organic gardening and conventional gardening. One side's organic, one side's conventional. These are some plots at Fort Braden. And this is some of our summer gardens. This is a layout. We've decided on 40 garden plots, 15 by 15, and the whole garden only takes up 100 by 200 feet of space, so you don't really need a lot of space. We grow a lot of vegetables. That doesn't include the space where we park for the pole barn and that type of thing, so we do have more space than that, but for the actual gardening, that's all we have. We encourage organic fertilizer. We don't require it. We find that it's an education process for people who've gardened in the conventional manner, and they're finding that when they watch our gardens continue to improve as we add material, they start adding material to their garden and they get rid of some of those old ideas. And integrated pest management, which is really just start with the simplest things first, wash bugs off with water, pick them off by hand. If that doesn't work, advance to the next level and use some non-invasive things, BT, DP, that type of thing, dibble. And we encourage drip or micro irrigation. Some gardens only allow hand watering. Some gardens don't allow timers because people tend not to turn them off when it rains. and they water too much. Hand watering is much better. Anything you'd like to?
I know in the description of the workshop or the session here, it talked about reducing your impact on water resources, and a lot of these things will do that. You know, with your irrigation, you don't want to irrigate after raining or during it's raining. Your IPM, don't use chemicals unless you have to. And fertilizer, again, you know, use it wisely and so it doesn't run downstream and impact our water resources.
Yep, and being as close to Lake Talquin as we are, that's a real consideration for us, but everybody in Tallahassee is close to a body of water of some sort, it seems like. And although our garden looks flat, it actually has a grade that runs into the ditch, that runs into the next ditch, that runs into the lake. So when you start, what's your organization going to look like? And as Mark said, you have to think about the people and you need to decide things together. You usually start out with a committee of 2 or 3 or 4 dedicated people, and as you get going, you get more people involved and it becomes sort of an association. Later down the road, you may want to become a little more organized. We've formed a nonprofit corporation that's really easy to do. The Secretary of State's office, you can go online, it's sunbiz.org, sunbiz.org. There's a form there to form a nonprofit corporation. It costs about $70, and you have to file an annual report that's about $65 a year. You can or cannot form a 501c3, and the reason for having a 501c3 is if you want to apply for grants or if people are making substantial contributions to the garden, then they will be able to deduct those contributions where they cannot if you just have a simple nonprofit. And the only other thing that's involved there is you'd have to get a tax ID number, which you can do online very easily. If you're part of a larger entity, like a church or school, neighborhood association, perhaps you'll operate under their umbrella, but you can also have a 501c3 within that group too. That's just something that you'll have to decide. Are you going to operate on a formal basis or an informal? Even if you have just an association, if you're just operating with volunteers, for instance, our officers are all volunteers. We've never had more than one person volunteer for a position at a time, so you don't really need an election. Even though if you're in a corporation, they anticipate you're going to do elections, we operate on a much less formal basis. You can have officers. What we did is we listed all the things that we needed to do to operate the garden, and then we divided it up into what we called officers, but it was really a matter of dividing up the duties. We have a managing committee, which we find works really well. We got 4 or 5 people that meet maybe once before we meet monthly, and sometimes we have a management committee meeting beforehand to set the agenda and to talk over any ideas that people have presented. Most of the time, whatever we recommend is done, but we definitely want the gardeners to become involved. That's part of keeping it running, is to involve your gardeners and to form a community. I'm the garden manager, but really what I do is I'm just a central clearinghouse for information. I do some extra little duties, but the gardeners pretty much share the duties in the garden. We have a bank account. If you have a bank account, the only caution I have is you want to have a little bit of financial control. Have one person hold the checkbook and the other one reconcile the bank statement. That's a protection of the person with the checkbook and the protection of the gardeners to make sure nobody makes off with the money. Happens. The division of duties is partly because I may not be there forever, and we certainly don't want the same person making all the decisions all the time. So you want to have a backup. If I go on a month's trip, or if I become ill, or whoever's doing that particular job, you want to have, not only that, it gets the gardeners involved. You want to have people feel that it's their garden. And you can operate with the majority. We've never had to do that. Everybody pretty much agrees. And sometimes when we started out, we were really just a benign dictatorship. We just decided and everybody else went along. And you'll find that that works pretty well most of the time, too. Financing, as I said, there's a grant from the county you can apply for. There's many other grants you can apply for. We charge plot fees. I notice some of the other gardeners charge even more than we do. You can do fundraising. And where we spend that, and there's a million ways you can spend money, is we improve the garden. We plant flowers, we put up a sign, and we bought a lawnmower, a tiller, we have a shredder for our compost, and we provide soil amendments occasionally. One of the ways to keep your gardeners is to make sure that their gardens are successful, and one of the ways to do that is to compost and have it available for them. We always have hay out for mulch. We try to spend our money on things that benefit all the gardeners.
Yeah, just that last slide talking about governance, and if you're thinking of forming your own group and all these things, it's a little overwhelming, all these official titles. I mean, they're just, titles, and, like she said, you'll work it all out, and you might have a fancy name, but really you're just part of the garden group.
That's right. And you do want it to be more like a family than an organization. That's really going to keep people there. Gardening rules, there's a handout here called a community garden starter kit, and it's just a list of things you need to consider and some rules you might want to consider, how you're going to do your watering, what you're going to do to conserve water. If you're on a slope, you want to build some berms to trap the water where the garden is so that it doesn't run away, keep the water within the garden. What you're going to do about fertilizer and pest control. Plot maintenance, that's one of the issues that comes up sometimes. People have different levels of participation and tolerance for weeds and things. You notice this one at the bottom. Somebody mentioned this morning they went by our garden at the end of August, early September, and it really looked weedy. Well, it's at the end of the summer, and it's been very hot. They're all cleaned up now, and this is gone, but you do have to keep after people. This person, we had to say, you need to get this done by the end of October because we're renewing, and you won't be able to renew if your garden's not cleaned up.
For ideas on gardening rules, the American Community Garden Association has a lot of information on that. I think you can go to Mr. Ballantyne's Man in Overalls website. He's got a lot of information. And Zach Galloway over here with the City of Tallahassee, his website at the City Planning also has lots of information to get sample rules and other links to more information.
Yeah, if you want to go to the city website, if you just Google Tallahassee Community Gardens, it's the first thing on the top of the list. And the one for the county is called growinggreen.org. And they both have lots of good information. And Nathan's website, Tallahassee
Man in Overalls?
Yeah, Man in Overalls is easier to remember, yes. And he has lots of resources, and he is a great help for anybody that's starting a community garden. Oh, well, let me go back a minute. There's something else I wanted to mention. Gardening year. When we started out, we charged fees from January 1st to the December 31st. And even though we actually started gardening the 1st of October, we just gave people those first 3 months. Well, we found out that we really should have had our fees from October 1st to September 30th, because if you have your fees on an annual basis, if somebody leaves the garden and a new person comes in on the 1st of January, there may be vegetables in the garden that the previous person grew, and it's too late for the new person to plant anything for winter for the most part. October the 1st is really a good time to start your gardening year, because you get new people in and they can plant a fall garden. Fall gardens are easy, they're successful, there's not many bugs, and so you really have happy gardeners if you do that. The community building is at least as important as growing vegetables when it comes to community gardens, and there's a lot of ways to communicate. Websites, blogs, Facebook, so forth. When you get to the bottom of the list, you've noticed the signs here. The top one is out on the road. That's for dissemination of information to the community. And the bottom one is within the garden. That's information for the gardeners. And we share a lot of information that way. Telephone tree. I hate to talk on the phone, but there is a system where you may probably know about it. There's a lot of different programs on the web called phone blast programs, where you dictate a short message and you put in the phone numbers one time and it'll remember them, and you just send out a message to those who don't have email and so forth. And that's worked pretty well for us. We communicate with our bulletin board. Mailing is more time-consuming and costs money. And word of mouth is going to happen, but it's probably the worst way in the world to communicate information because it always gets to the wrong people or not the right people, and it gets misrepresented. So make sure you have some means of communication besides word of mouth.
And as far as community building goes, community gardens are great because you raise, vegetables right there and you can eat them. But the best part about a community garden is the interactions with all the people that show up. So
that's true.
There we go.
There we go. Meetings, we can be regular meetings or informal meetings. And food. Food is one of the most important things in bringing people together. Food from the garden. We have covered dish. We have one of our gardeners is really good with pulled pork and hamburgers, and it really brings people out on work day, and the real communication gets done over the food. We sort of tithe in our garden. We got 40 plots, and four of them are set aside for people who can't afford to pay the fee or for charitable purposes. St. Andrew's Anglican Church gardens on 2 of them and takes the vegetables to Good News Ministries. We have open houses. We have speakers. Field trips. We went over to Bonnie's Plants in Greensboro. They have a new facility over there and looked at how they grow plants. We had a young man come and demonstrate native bees, and he built us a native bee house out of bamboo. And I guess really the main one is shared knowledge, and that's part of what Mark's talking about, is when you see some other gardener out there, the best way to keep people in the garden is to make sure that they're successful gardening, and helping them garden and providing them the materials for them is a way to do that. And of course, the gardening that Mark does is mostly for educational purposes, right?
Yeah, a lot of my gardening, I maintain the Frenchtown Garden at City Community Center, and it's mostly young kids in the after-school program that help me in the garden and help eat all the yummy veggies.
And it's a good way to teach kids about vegetables. My grandchildren don't eat anything that's not white. These are some of the activities we've done that's helped to form our community. We've got gardeners of all ages. We love having the kids out there, and they really enjoy it. We actually had a blessing in our garden, the St. Andrew's plots. They came out after church one Sunday, and the priest came with all his regalia and blessed our entire garden. We really appreciated that. And this is young Ryan on the bottom left. He's the one with the native bees. He's homeschooled, and he is just an amazing kid. So other things you can do for community building is projects within the garden. We had some trees donated for an orchard. We have a couple of beehives, bat houses. We had built a greenhouse. The county donated rain barrels and compost bins. We don't have a playground and probably won't put one in because we don't have that many small children, and a picnic area. And my caution there is start slow. We really got off to a zinging start, and we did all these things, and they all take a lot of work, and people have jobs and families, and they're growing vegetables, so make sure you have somebody that wants to maintain those things before you put them in. We don't regret having done any of them, and we're still working on them, but we found that our enthusiasm outlasted our ability to keep things up on a couple of...
listen to that. It's a
And I think that's true of any group. You start out, you're enthusiastic, and so do one thing at a time instead of all of them at once. Bees and bat houses and bird houses are all part of integrated pest management. You want to attract pollinators, and you want the birds to help you with your bug control. It's really important, and we have been pretty successful with that.
And as far as getting the kids involved, they love to eat the vegetables out of the garden, but even more fun is flipping compost piles with a pitchfork. Or
yes.
Taking mulch out of the back of a truck, using wheelbarrows. I even let them use a dull machete, but they have a great time with it. So
we let them use our shredder, but we supervise them closely, and it's so much fun to put that stuff in there and watch it eat it up. So we have compost. The county donated the compost bins and the rain barrels, and we really appreciate that. However, the compost bins don't make enough compost for a community garden. We got 6 of them. And they're a little harder to maintain because you really need to leave the lid off so that they have some moisture in them. And we have a lot of carbon material, but we have less nitrogen material, and you really need both. So we built compost bins in addition to those. We maintain those, but we built compost bins out of pallets, and they seem to be working quite well. We get manure from the country feed store, donkey manure, and add to our shredded things. You would be amazed at how much garden waste a garden produces, and we don't want to haul that to the dump. We want to recycle it into the garden because it's full of nutrients, and so we use for compost. And the bottom pile is delivered to us by Talcon Electric. That's wood chips. We use it for our pathways, and when it's composted, we use it on our garden. We use it to help make the compost. This is one of our open houses. One of the ways to have a successful garden is to get the public officials that are in your area involved too. Let them know what you're doing. They'll be glad to support you. Jane Sauls was very helpful in getting our garden started, and it's really good to keep them up on what's going on. These are just some pictures. Here's food. We had our first open house. We had music. One of our gardeners is a musician. We had a beehive demonstration, food. So some problems we've run into, and that you may also, is we had some vandalism in the garden. We have an 8-foot fence, and the kids managed to, we think it was kids, it was summertime, managed to climb over the fence and throw watermelons around, and they even took the wheelbarrow and threw it over the fence. Now how they managed that, I don't know. We've had a little trouble with alcohol in the garden. We have a rule, no alcohol. And you'll run into abrasive personalities no matter what kind of an organization you have. Plot maintenance, we saw that lovely plot a while ago. Too many projects and improvements, maintenance, gardener participation, vacant lots. We only have one vacant lot at this time, so we're doing pretty good. And waning interest. People start out, just as the gardener group starts out, enthusiastic. They find out there actually are weeds that grow, there are bugs that eat your vegetables. They do have limited time, and keeping them involved and with successful gardens is the best way to keep them going.
And one thing about the vandalism, it's, when we started the garden at the community center in Frenchtown, a big concern was vandalism. So they decided that we needed to have it all fenced off. Well, the problem with having it all fenced off was that it didn't feel very inviting. So the garden is open all the time now, and we do have some issues with vandalism, but overall, it's a small problem that we can get along with.
We actually put vegetables, we have a picnic table under our shelter. We put vegetables out on the table and just left them, and some got taken. We'd be glad to give anybody vegetables if they'd just let us know. It was the destruction of vegetables that we didn't really like.
Yeah, one of the funny things with leaving the garden open is the kids think they're being bad when they sneak in to take carrots and strawberries. So I let them do that.
I used to love to do that in my mother's garden. Some solutions. We had a scarecrow contest, and this scarecrow we called the night crawler. And we never had any vandalism after we put that scarecrow up. So you can really handle things with a little humor sometimes. I know whoever was doing it had to come by and see that scarecrow, and we all just loved it. Make sure you communicate. Make sure somebody's going to be sending out emails, putting signs up on the bulletin board. Right now, our website is a little out of date. Somebody had volunteered to take it over, and we've had a little trouble keeping it maintained. Be flexible. You're going to have different people in the garden, different ideas about what constitutes a garden, what constitutes acceptable maintenance, and so forth. So tolerate some differences. Don't overreact. I mean, at the end of the summer, I could have gotten really alarmed and made everybody come in and clean up their gardens, but in the end, they got around to it. You have to allow people to fit in, and just hang in there and keep with it. In closing, maybe we'll give you all time to ask some questions, but I've been attending a permaculture class, and one of the things that we're studying is how to collaborate within a group. Well, any group, not just community gardens, are going to run into the same kind of problems, some of which I've mentioned, and this is a fantastic book. It's called The Empowerment Manual, It's a little new agey, and if you're not into that, just ignore it, because there's some really, really good information in this book, and it talks about, it's actually like a communal community that they're talking about, but it talks about getting people involved, keeping them involved, dealing with abrasive personalities and so forth. So any organization that you're involved in, it would be useful.
Who wrote that?
It's Starhawk, a lady named Starhawk. That gives you an idea of how new agey it is.
How many people here have never gardened?
Fantastic.
Oh, awesome.
All right.
Oh, we have one here. How many are involved with a community garden? This guy, you guys need to grab him and go garden with him. We have a group of FSU students that come to Frenchtown every Thursday. And for, I think it's been the last month straight, every college kid that has come there has never gardened before. So they're getting their first kind of, experience with dirt and seeds when they come out to the garden. It's kind of amazing that there's, so many people that have never played in the dirt.
We have a whole generation of people who have not gardened, and we need to start that again. We need to have them remembering, we need to have kids remembering that they pick vegetables out of their mom's or their grandma's garden. It really makes a difference when it gets down the road. All right, so if you have some questions, just, if you will, come up so we can all hear the question, and yes, come on up.
I just want to announce that one of the services provided by Sustainable Tallahassee is if you choose not to become a 501c3, Sustainable Tallahassee will act as your fiscal agent for your community garden. And this is a service we provide for the Southwood Community Garden. And it also could be a bridge between your startup to your eventual, organizing as a 501c3. So contact us through our website if you are interested in that service.
Yeah, and add to that, DeMine's done that as well a couple of times.
Right.
So.
And Trevor Hilton, who is the extension agent for urban gardening and so forth, is on hand to help anybody who wants to start a community garden. He helped us a lot. Yes.
Yeah, Carlos Boadis. The next step to community gardening is obviously canning. Do you have any experience on that, and do you recommend that community gardens go to the next step?
I would talk to Heidi Copeland. She in here? At IFAS. She is. Repeat the question for you. Oh, the question was about the next step is canning and preserving the food from the garden. At our garden, it's a pretty small garden. There's a lot of kids. A lot of the food gets kind of eaten right there. But you have a big garden like at Fort Braden. Heidi Copeland at Extension Office would, I'm sure, be glad to come give teach a canning class.
Actually, on November the 17th, she's coming to our garden to give a demonstration on canning and freezing and drying. Yes, it is the next step, and it's something that you need to teach your gardeners. Just eating what's in season gets kind of boring sometimes. I mean, how many collards can you eat? And preserving them so that you can have them in the middle of the summer is great.
Nathan can eat a lot of collard greens.
Any other questions? Great. I hope you'll start gardening. Oh, good.
I'm aware that there's a little bit of resistance to allowing community gardens on land from property owners who may think that this is just a fad or a temporary thing. What's your response to that concern?
I mean, just like working in your group of gardeners to get the rules out, if you're using a private piece of land, you need to work really closely with the landowner, obviously, to get permission. I know the Salvation Army Garden is having some troubles where the land swapped hands, and now they're trying to find a new spot. And unfortunately, that's kind of how it is. If it's not your property, you got to kind of try to make a really good relationship with the property owner. But if it comes time to sell, I mean, you're kind of stuck. But I know the city, when we first started at in Frenchtown, the city was a little resistant. The supervisor at the community center, and then folks in the Parks and Rec department. But we had a really, she talked about having some political allies, and we had someone in the Parks Department that felt strongly that they wanted this to see happen, and they were able to push it through. So I guess it's more of this relationship. Maybe it's in this Starhawk book here, how to work with the landowners to try to build a good relationship to make them happy. And
Havana Community Garden is actually on private property, but they have a partnership with the city of Havana that they install the water lines and so forth, so it is a matter of collaboration. That's the bottom line. And make sure that if you're working, if you do get permission on private property, that you keep the property owner involved. Invite them to your meetings, feed them some food, give them some vegetables, and make sure that they know what you're doing to keep it up. Make sure you keep the weeds down. We don't have a private property owner, we have the county, but we actually maintain more than what our garden encompasses. We've cut weeds under trees that are adjacent to the garden, and now when they come out with their mowers in the larger area around it, because there's 9 acres there, they're coming closer and closer to our garden and actually maintaining some of our space because we've formed a mutual benefit society, so to speak. We help them maintain and they help us. There was something else?
Another thing too for private property especially is a lease. Just a
Yes.
simple lease that, maybe put something in the lease that says, if you want me to get out of here when you're going to sell the property, give me the end of the growing season, or give me some time to find another place and to start somewhere else.
Right.
And harvest the veggies I have in the ground.
Right. Yeah, even on the county, as a part of our agreement, if they need the land for some other purpose, they can have to give us notice and we could have to vacate. And there's some provisions about whether we'll put it back in the original condition or at least take away some of our things. So it's something you have to think about. It's mainly communication more than anything else, I think. Anybody else?
Do you have an animal control problem, like squirrels?
Well, we actually have a deer fence, but then we had to buy chicken wire and go around the bottom of the deer fence because we were still, rabbits and squirrels and things can run right through the hog wire. And we haven't had a lot. For a while, there was an armadillo that dug under the fence and was managing to nose around, but they don't really do that much damage. The fence pretty well takes care of it. I'm sure if you don't have a fence, you have some damage.
Yeah, I have squirrel damage and just insect and other problems, but the biggest problem is the two-legged creatures that step all over stuff or pull vegetables. But what can I do? I just persevere.
They need it too, I guess. Anybody else? Thank you so much.
Thank you.